Evolution at the end is going to look at the number of counts, or another way to think of it is what we see today are those lines that proliferated the most in the past.
Welcome to Longevity by Design, a podcast designed to give individuals access to the leading scientific information in the field of longevity. The ability to add years to your life and life to your years needs no opinion. Join us as we ask science to take the wheel. In each episode, Dr. Gil Blander joins a co-host and an industry expert in the field of longevity, shining a light and getting the answers to the key question: how can we live a longer, healthier life?
Hello, I'm Dr. Gil Blander. Welcome to Longevity by Design, how to live longer, healthier life. We are produced by InsideTracker, your science-based guide to optimize your body from the inside out. Our guest today is Dr. Michael Ringel. Dr. Ringel is the COO of Life Biosciences, a biotechnology company focused on autophagy and partial reprogramming. Previously was managing director and senior partner at BCG and the former global leader of research and product development and innovation. His TED Talk on innovation can be viewed at TED.com. Deeply involved in longevity, lifespan, and healthspan research, he served on the boards of Evolution Foundation, US, and the American Federation of Aging Research. Before these roles, Michael worked in academia, researching theoretical population dynamics and conducting field experiments in the Amazon basin in Brazil. He held a BA in biology from Princeton University, a PhD in biology from Imperial College, and a JD from Harvard Law School. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for that very warm introduction. Excited to be here.
Yeah, no, I'm excited as well. And I have to say that I've seen your presentation in the last few years at ARDD, and every year it's maybe the highlight of the conference, your viewpoint and the way that only someone that works in a big consulting company can see all the directions. So I really appreciate it. I love those. And hopefully we can communicate part of it to our audience today. But before we go there, I would like to ask you a question about your past and specifically what led you to become a scientist.
It's a little bit happenstance. It was driven by interest at the core, which is, I just really loved it, even from a young age. And who knows what motivates us. But the plan was I was always going to go be a lawyer, go straight to law. And, I was in undergrad and I had an advisor who took some care and some notice. And he said, look, you're really good at this biology stuff, but you seem to really like it. Why don't you stick with it? And, I said, no, I have to go be a lawyer. That's, what my father does. And that's the path, right? And he said, well, look, if you're in such a hurry, why don't you go to the UK and do a degree there? You can do it quicker. And I was like, well, that's interesting. It's nice to go live abroad. And I was lucky enough that I had a merit scholarship to do it. And so, I essentially followed my advisor's advice to stick with something that interested me. And then, it ended up obviously being where I focused all my time. The law degree ended up not being used. And, all my work at BCG and since then has been really around how you do R&D within pharmaceuticals and find the right targets and obviously prosecute them and bring medicines to market as a result. So a little bit interest, a little bit luck, and a little bit, the caring guidance of a mentor.
That's great. Yeah. And as we know, we have a lot of things that we can plan as much as we want, but at the end of the day, the direction will come. And so my next question is, as you said, you spent a lot of time at BCG, which is one of the best, maybe the best management consulting firm in the world. And but still you continue or started to be very interested in longevity and aging. So what made you go to that direction? What made you fascinated about aging and longevity?
kind of a similar story, actually, from a very young age, interested in the idea. I don't know how, but my father knew about caloric restriction. And so told me about it in the 70s when I was a kid. And I was like, well, that's kind of interesting. It'd be nice to live longer, but that seems awfully difficult. Sort of filed it away. And then I was doing my work for my PhD in the 90s was on diapause. It's the same time that Cynthia Kenyon's article on DAF2 and worms, which is a diapause gene. But if you knock it out, the worms, live 50% longer. And that was a clue, right? That this is manipulable. I think we sort of knew it from evolutionary biology that lifespan is selected like many other traits. Like, why would this be different? You have species that have vastly different lifespans. And so, that's not by happenstance, that's by selection. But, to actually see the sort of molecular biology proof of that there were genetic pathways involved that you could potentially manipulate, became the first clue that there was a path forward here. And so I stayed interested in it from then, looked for ways to apply it in the work at BCG, and that continued to expand. I built an interest group within the company. We did a few projects here and there. But the reality is this is not yet at the focus area for big pharma. I think that will come soon, and other big companies. So I think, it wasn't quite ready for BCG focus. And so for me to really get more engaged in it, I had to kind of shift gears and move into the biotech space where I think the action is really happening now.
And very recently, you jumped to the pool and moved. That was what, like a couple of weeks ago?
Yeah, literally under 2 weeks. My involvement has been progressively growing over the years. So I did a part-time activity and some advisory work starting in 2018. So that's 7 years ago now. Joined the board of Evolution Foundation US and the American Federation for Aging Research, which you mentioned. Also on an advisory board for Sheba Longevity Clinic. So it's sort of by increments I was getting more engaged. But then, the full jump, right? This is my full-time job, like you said, is less than 2 weeks old. And I'm super excited about it.
Yeah, no, that's great to be the youngest person or the freshest person in the aging domain. So, and I think that you are a great asset. So I'm very happy that you
Thanks.
have done the move. And now if we will start diving into the meat and potatoes and basically aging and longevity. So high level question is why evolution allows aging? Why should we die? Why should we age?
So there's tons of confusion on this, right? I think partly because a lot of the folks that work in aging don't have an evolutionary biology background. Also partly because some of the initial hypotheses as to why they've proven out false. The evidence is completely against them, and yet they're still stuck in the minds of folks. The key one being this idea that there's something called mutation accumulation. Well, at older and older ages, fewer and fewer individuals survive. It becomes harder and harder for selection to weed out mutations, and you reach some age where, eventually you're just going to die because there's too many things that have problems that arise that haven't been selected out. The issue with that explanation is it makes a lot of other ancillary predictions, none of which are true. Things like you should see mortality rates grow exponentially with age. They do, but then they plateau, which is totally contrary to the prediction. It also predicts that it should be extremely difficult to extend lifespan because any change you make will run into, there's other problems. That's also been proven completely false. And fundamentally, if you do the math, you need, for mutation accumulation to work, you have to reach this limit where there's like less than 1% of people left. And yet we see aging happen even starting at age 25. And certainly well before there's only 1% of the population. So a lot of reasons why that explanation, which is so stuck in the consciousness, does not match reality, nor does it match the fundamental sort of what we know about evolution. Like, it's making a claim that selection is unable to operate on aging, which is like a pretty bold claim, right? Selection operates in lots of places, but no, this place, no, they can't work on it. And there's an alternate explanation which matches all the data and which sort of fundamentally matches what we know about evolution, which is it's selected for. Lifespan is selected for. And the key reason is that energy and other resources are not infinite. It may feel that way when we live in our Western society in abundance, but the reality is they're limited, and it plays a role in the ecology that any species goes through. They have a budget that they have to think about, or not think, this is, it has to be selected upon in terms of how resources are allocated. And growth and reproduction versus maintenance and repair is kind of a key trade-off. And if you put, essentially too much effort into maintenance and repair, you're slowing down growth and reproduction. And what selection cares about is not your personal lifespan, you being alive, right? What selection maximizes is the long run rate of increase of a line of descent. So essentially the long-term number of offspring at some sort of very far out date in the future. And whatever maximizes that is what's going to be selected for, because that's the thing we're going to see in the future, the most copies of what's going to be around. And the optimum, essentially, as long as you have a soma, which most organisms do, is that investment in soma is going to, the body, the non-reproductive part, is going to be less than full maintenance. And so different species, all species, pretty much all animal species age. There's a few exceptions we can talk about, with vastly different lifespans depending on what the conditions they're in, how slow they have to be in terms of gaining resources. So you might have to live a long time even to be able to reproduce once. You see that with, species in extreme environments like Greenland shark. The level of their extrinsic mortality. So if you're going to get killed, next year, let's say you're a mouse trying to make it through winter or avoid predation, it doesn't make sense to invest in the soma when it's just going to get destroyed anyway. And so these species, a lot of what we call R-selected species, have incredibly high reproductive rates, but very short intrinsic lifespans as a result. And of course, humans are somewhere in the middle, but much more on the long-lived end of that spectrum.
Yeah. So basically, if I'm trying to say what you said or repeat what you said, what is important for evolution is basically transfer the torch to the next generation. And at the moment that you are behind that, you are less important for evolution, and that's why we age, because there is no evolution pressure to make us live longer, because we are not taking care of our next generation. That's fair to say?
I think so. Other things being equal, it's better not to die, right? Evolution at the end is going to look at the number of counts, or another way to think of it is what we see today are those lines that proliferated the most in the past.
Okay.
And, you surviving is not bad for that, right? You want to continue for that. But if you're putting so much energy into you surviving that your reproductive rate is depressed, then evolution will select against that, because that line is going to leave fewer copies.
Yeah.
And of course, there's all sorts of random events that come and happen that, kill individuals, right? A meteor can land on someone or something like that, right? So few copies ultimately means, extinction. The line will not be observed. So this trade-off between, yes, I can put energy into maintenance and repair versus I can put energy or other resources into reproduction it gets set by a balance between those. And of course, it depends on essentially the level of extrinsic mortality that a species suffers. It will put more energy into reproduction when that extrinsic mortality is very high. But it's never 100% into maintenance and repair.
Yeah, no, makes sense. And a follow-up question from that is, if we have so much evolution pressure, can we delay the aging process and live longer? And you said, you gave us a clue by Cynthia Kenyon paper, but I will let you talk about it.
Yeah, it's super manipulable because it is a trait that's under selection. So how do we know this? We know this a number of ways. So one is comparative biology. So the best example that I know of is the Pacific rockfishes. This is a group of species. Their common ancestors is only 8 million years ago, so a fairly recent clade. Some species of Pacific rockfish live 10 years. Others live 200 years. And this is their intrinsic rate of aging, right? They're not killed by some other means.
Yeah.
That's an enormous difference, right? 20x difference just within this very closely related set of species that only diverged a few million years ago. And first of all, the ones that are long-lived match what we would predict. So they're the species that have low resource variability, a little bit depth, and essentially the resource is low, but it's not so variable. They don't have good year, bad year. It's like all years are about the same. And they have low predation because they're a large body. Those are the ones, low extrinsic mortality, either through resource deprivation or predation. Those are exactly the species that are long-lived. And the ones at the other end of the spectrum have, one or both of those conditions in place. So, and we know, just a few genetic manipulations made the difference between those species. That's one way we know. Another way we know, you alluded to, which is we can manipulate the genotype of a species or an individual and, knock out a gene and make it live much longer. We can also now do that pharmacologically, right? The Harrison mouse study by the National Institute of Aging in what's called the Interventions Testing Program, ITP, in 2009 proved that you can take a pharmacological agent in a mouse and extend its lifespan, as well as its health span, reduce its rate of age-related disease and many other issues. So there's a lot of reason to believe this is manipulable. And, we're getting to the point now where we're getting close to doing things like this in humans. It'll start with addressing age-related diseases in humans, but there's no reason why it can't go to lifespan and health span extension more explicitly.
Yeah, no, that's great, and thank you so much for the to elaborate on that. And you also discussed a bit about age-related diseases. So sounds like you believe that we can also delay the onset of those. Can you discuss that a bit?
Yeah. So many of the diseases that plague us, most chronic diseases, are diseases that are associated with age. I think we know that intuitively, but just to make that very explicit, many of them go up exponentially or nearly exponentially with age. Think about diabetes, think about cardiovascular disease, think about cancer, think about neurodegeneration, right? No 2-year-olds don't get Alzheimer's, right? It's a disease of the old, but so also are cancers and cardiovascular disease and so on. And there's a list of, hundreds of these that go up with age. Not all, right? There's some conditions that don't, but many of the diseases that plague us and that account for the vast majority of the total burden of disease. So age is the number one risk factor for these conditions. We haven't thought of that historically as an intervention point because we haven't thought of age as something that's manipulable. But if in fact it is true that you can decouple biological age from chronological age, then that becomes an intervention point, and that single intervention point addresses lots of diseases simultaneously. This is the geroscience hypothesis, I think originally coined by Gordon Lithgow at Buck Institute, but a term that I think folks have had in their minds for a while, that this becomes a single intervention point that could address many diseases. Should be really interesting to pharma because it's basically a pipeline and a pill. One intervention can essentially create, lots of medicines for different diseases. And I think we're finally actually seeing it in practice with the GLP-1 analogs that many people are aware of that address obesity and diabetes from Eli Lilly and Novo Nordisk and others. These therapies have profound results, not just in the areas of their initial focus, but now we're learning, yes, they have therapeutic benefit in chronic kidney disease. Yes, they have therapeutic benefit in heart failure, cardiovascular disease. There is evidence that they have therapeutic benefit in cancer. We'll see. There's evidence that they have therapeutic benefit in neurodegeneration. There's trials underway to determine this for sure. And people are a little bit perplexed. Why would a therapy that's addressing, essentially obesity and glucose, why would that affect all these other conditions? But if you think about it from the perspective of the geroscience hypothesis, there's no surprise at all. It's exactly what we expect.
Yeah, and for the audience, we had a deep dive into GLP-1 a few episodes ago. We spoke with the person that identified the GLP-1, and we spoke about everything that you said, Michael, and that's amazing how literally you can eradicate maybe diabetes by that, and obesity. And as you said, maybe cardiovascular disease. It's amazing how powerful, in my opinion, this drug. Again, I'm sure that we'll find some drawback about it, but it is a really a game changer in the industry. And I have a few directions that I want to go from here. So I want to talk about the pharma, but maybe before of that, a question and the point that you raised that you have been thinking about from very young age is the caloric restriction. And there are a lot of explanation, or people try to explain, and I assume that we don't understand it well enough yet. But in your opinion, why caloric restriction extend the lifespan and also health span?
Yeah. So again, you have to think about evolutionary biology to answer a why question. And always maybe a more of a molecular biology question, and we can come to that as well. So why would this kind of be, this phenomenon, right, where starving an organism, why in the world would that make it live long? And it's not just caloric restriction, by the way. There's a lot of other kind of mild insults you can do that actually make organisms live longer. Hypoxia, so reduce oxygen. You can do some extreme temperatures that, again, make the organism live longer. When you think about it from an evolutionary perspective, it's very clear why this would be selected for. So imagine you're a mouse. It's a bad season. There's not any food around, or it's cold or whatever. Not a good time to reproduce. What would evolution select for in terms of a plasticity of your response? So when it's bad conditions, you should take the energy that you would have put into reproduction and growth and hold that back, because if you had offspring, they're just going to die in the middle of a harsh winter or of a drought or famine condition. Instead, redeploy that energy to maintenance and repair for a period of time and stretch and live longer. And if you're a mouse and you live one extra year, which is what we see with caloric restriction, that gives you one extra season. Wait till next year and see if the conditions are good and you can actually breed. Huge difference, right? If you just left the energy into breeding in the bad year, that line dies out. The line that says, I'm going to hold back and shift that energy or other resources into waiting another year and then try to breed again. Yeah, you delayed a year, you lost a year. But it's way better than, having tried to do a futile attempt at breeding. And so that's the evolutionary explanation for why we see this. It also says that we should see more profound effects from caloric restriction in short-lived species than in long-lived species, because if you're a mouse and get one extra season, it's a lot more important than if you're a human that lives 80 years anyway. You've already had a lot of opportunities. At the other end of the spectrum, if you're a worm or a fly, which are even more short-lived than a mouse, you're talking about not a bad season, but, it's a week without rains or something like that. Yeah. And actually, there's enough variability in weather over those kind of periods of time that it really makes sense to wait it out. And so we do see this kind of inverse relationship between the intrinsic lifespan of the species and the amount of impact that caloric restriction or some of these other insults have. And of course, that means that for humans, we're not likely to see the kinds of longevity gains from caloric restriction or mimetics that kind of try to emulate the effect of caloric restriction than we see in the other species. We're not going to see a 50% extension of human lifespan. What we are going to see is health span gains of possibly a few decades, and, maybe a couple of years of lifespan. And of course, that's still incredibly valuable from a public health perspective to have people living healthy for, another decade or two.
Yeah. No, I love your explanation. This makes a lot of sense.
As a Longevity by Design podcast listener, you understand the value of improving your health for today and for all the years ahead. And if you want to live your healthiest, longest life possible, you need to understand what's going on inside. At InsideTracker, we take a personalized approach to Healthspan optimization that eliminates guesswork from your wellness plan. InsideTracker analyzes blood biomarker and DNA data, along with physiomarker data from fitness trackers like Oura Ring, to deliver personalized food, supplement, lifestyle, and exercise recommendations that allow you to take control and improve your health span. And for a limited time, Longevity by Design listeners can get 20% off at the InsideTracker store. So if you're ready to receive a personal health analysis and data-driven wellness plan to optimize your body for the long haul, then it's time to start inside. Visit InsideTracker.com/podcast to get started today. That's InsideTracker.com/podcast to get started today.
And now I would like to start touching the pharma and basically how can we take all the excitement that we have right now in the aging research field and bring him to the big boys. You mentioned Lilly, but there are a lot of other, and make them start working on aging and start developing a pipeline of drugs. What do they need to? What do we need to do in order to make them excited about it?
So the first thing I'd say is they're all, not all, but I know from firsthand experience that a lot of the top 20 pharmas are thinking about it. So I've had one-on-one conversations with CEOs of top 10 pharma who are interested in the space. So it's not that it's not on their radar yet, but they're starting to explore and think about it. I think the thing that pushes it over the edge is, assets that are, molecules that biotechs have put forward, have brought to, at least phase 2 of clinical trials where you've got some efficacy data showing that it seems to work in at least a small population of people. Then, it becomes basically the same story that they have for any other kind of drug candidate, right? Seems to work. We're excited about it. It's an area that we believe, can help a lot of people, that we can sell. And so, licensing or M&A should proceed from there. I think a number of companies do sort of understand now this is a way to a pipeline and a pill, which is incredibly important to pharma. If you can have one agent address a lot of diseases, obviously becomes, your risk profile, right? Your ability to get a molecule through, you already know it's safe. You're just trying to find efficacy in a number of places, becomes a really positive risk profile, high return for a low amount of cost and risk. And so I think that'll start to get folks interested in these pathways of aging biology, like GLP-1 and, insulin signaling that it affects, as a way for companies to essentially build a broad profile of therapeutic effect for, a relatively small area of investment.
Yeah. And in your opinion, as of today, what are the exciting small molecules or pathway that, in your opinion, will go into the big pipeline of the pharma companies in, the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, I am at Life Biosciences. 5 to 10 years is within scope for when we should have a marketed product. So I'd be remiss not talking about it. So Life really focuses on partial epigenetic reprogramming. It's a technology that I think has tremendous long-term potential. It's really the only thing out there that I think has the potential to truly adjust human lifespan and health span. It taps into the same biology that allows us to make babies when we're old, right? My offspring, if I were to have offspring tomorrow, it's a little bit late for me and my wife, but if we were to do that, the offsprings will be born as babies from our old selves, which is sort of amazing, right? There's biology built into us that enables that. Of course, selection is very strong for that to happen. We've been able to tap into that with reprogramming, which won a Nobel Prize, right? The ability to take a cell and clone it and turn it into essentially, Dolly the sheep, right, was taken from a skin cell of a sheep and born as a baby from an adult cell. The question is, can we do that without doing what also happened in both of those cases, which is you lose the identity of the cell. So you de-age it, but you also de-identify it. So you take a skin cell or a nerve cell or a muscle cell or whatever and turn it into a pluripotent stem cell. It loses its function as whatever it was. And of course, you can't do that to your whole body. That would be a problem, right? You would essentially no longer function. Yeah. And the question is, can you decouple those and get the de-aging rejuvenation effect without the de-differentiation, loss of cell identity effect? And there's some evidence now that, in fact, that's possible, that we can decouple those. Long-term, that means potentially there's a path to rejuvenation, which is incredibly exciting. Short-term, we know that we can use this approach to have therapeutic benefit in a number of age-related diseases, at least in animal models. This is a 2020 paper in Nature that the Sinclair lab out of Harvard published, showing repair of a nerve crush model in mice, optic nerve. At Life, we've recapitulated that, Life Bio, the current company I'm at. And we've gone further to show that we can do similar regeneration in the optic nerve for non-human primates, for monkeys. And we're getting close to moving into the clinic to address a couple of age-related optic neuropathies in humans. One is glaucoma, which is a very prevalent disease. It affects a lot of people in the world. It has some treatments, but those treatments that generally fail eventually and you progress. Yeah, it causes blindness, can cause blindness. Another is a disease called NION, which is a mouthful, non-arteritic anterior ischemic optic neuropathy. Essentially, it's a stroke of the optic nerve. So, get a clot and you get ischemic, lack of blood flow, damage to the nerve, and it causes blindness. It's very sudden blindness. You can wake up the next morning and be partially blind in one eye. At an advanced age, let's say you're 50 or 60 and this happens to you, right? That's a big change. And of course, if it happens to one eye, there's a pretty good chance it's going to happen in the other eye as well. So people really live in fear that once it happens in one eye, they're going to go totally blind. There's no treatment for this, even off label. And so, we've got a candidate that we expect to be in the clinic within a year, addressing both of these diseases, that again has shown therapeutic benefit in the animal models. And now the test is, can we see the same result in humans? And if so, we'll have a path to real benefit for patients. And of course, a business model that makes sense for us as a biotech. And this same approach can go to lots of other organs. We're starting with the eye because it's an easy place to deliver and it's where the original paper was. But there's lots of other organs that we think we can reach with this approach.
Yeah. And just for the audience, I interviewed in the past George Church and David Sinclair, and they discuss about reprogramming. So if you are very interested about it, I recommend you to listen to those episodes. And I agree that reprogramming is one of the most exciting opportunity for the future. In addition to that, there are a few small molecules right now that they are in research. Can you talk maybe about metformin and rapamycin and maybe NAD analogs? What is your opinion, if you can, about that?
So many of these agents kind of work on the same pathway that caloric restriction is involved in. So rapamycin works on a key target called mTOR, which sort of is an integrator of a lot of upstream signals of our conditions for growth and reproduction, right or not. It'll integrate, obviously, insulin signaling, but all other signals like hypoxia, the energy state of the cell, are the presence of amino acids, which is the building blocks for growth and reproduction. Are they present or not? Doesn't make sense to try to build if they're not. And that's a target that has shown significant benefit. Really, the first target that was shown to have benefit in lifespan for normal mice models. You mentioned metformin. There's a couple different modes of action, but one of the key targets that people think is something called AMPK, which essentially measures the energy state of the cell, so upstream of mTOR, but kind of in the same pathway. Another potential intervention point that again has shown therapeutic benefit in Healthspan models of mice, and in some models has shown lifespan benefit, although in the NIA's intervention testing program, it did not show benefit.
Yeah.
And there are many other, right, upstream, downstream of this. We talked about autophagy very briefly at the beginning. That's an important effector that's downstream of mTOR. Essentially, autophagy is technically means self-eating, right? It's the cell kind of recycling damaged components. Should be an important therapeutic target. There's particularly in neurodegeneration, this might be valuable because there's a lot of evidence that neurodegeneration is at least complicated by the buildup of protein aggregates. Some evidence of causality, although it's a little bit controversial, but at least in some involvement. And of course, if you can clear those, we've now seen with a couple of molecules that are on market, finally, that you can have some disease modifying treatments in Alzheimer's and potentially other neurodegenerative diseases, which is great to see.
Yeah. And I just want to double click on metformin because it's an interesting example, I think. Metformin have been shown, as you said, to some, not everyone agree with that, but there was some effect on lifespan in diabetic that consume it versus not. Not a lot of positive result in animal models such as mice. And Nir Barzilai, which is a leading scientist in aging, is trying to push it into clinical study. The problem with that is it's a molecule that is out of patent. And I think that because of that, it's very hard for him or the team to run the study. So can you explain why is it so important not to be off patent for pharmaceutical companies?
Yeah. So maybe I'll take a step back too and just talk about different kinds of evidence that we have. Something's going to work for me personally, which is what we care about, right?
Yeah.
So one kind of evidence are what we see in experimental models with animals. That's good because it's experimental, right? You have a control group, you have a treatment group. You really can see causality. It's bad because it's in mice, and mice are not humans, and lots of things that work in mice don't work in humans. And so what we call the translation, the chance that something that works in mice that works in humans is way less than 100%. There's another kind of evidence, which is epidemiological evidence, which you just talked about with diabetics who consume metformin, as part of their therapy, seem to be even healthier than a normal human, when compared to the, kind of a cohort that's matched. However, that's not experimental. And whenever you do observational studies like this, epidemiological study, there's always a risk, a different risk than what you have with the animal experiments. It's humans, so you have no problem with translation. However, you always have to worry about confounders with observational studies. Is something else, like the people that are maybe people who are more attuned to their health are going to the doctor more often and getting prescriptions. And those people are also taking better care of themselves versus, the general population that maybe isn't visiting a physician at all. And so might live longer for that reason, totally unrelated to the metformin. We don't know I'm not saying that's the cause, but I'm just saying with observational studies, you never know whether the agent that you gave is the cause or whether some other factor that was influenced the population was the issue. And another good example is there's observational studies that skipping breakfast makes you live shorter. And yet there's other data saying that caloric restriction makes you live longer. And we don't know if the people that are skipping breakfast, is that truly the cause, or is it maybe there's some other factor? Maybe those people are sick, maybe they're poor, maybe they don't have access to good nutrition, right? And so it could be that that's the thing that's actually causing the problem. So unfortunately, there's no way to answer this without the gold standard, which is an experimental study in humans. And that's exactly what Nir Barzilai is trying to do with what's called the TAME trial, to avoid the problem of it's animals and we don't know if it translates, and avoid the problem of it's observational and we don't know whether it's really true or something else is causing it, and do both, right? Experimental, we have a control group and a treatment group in humans. Now, is metformin exactly the right agent to do this? I'm not 100% sure. There's a few different agents that we could potentially explore. One of the issues that you talk about with metformin is that there's little commercial incentive to do it, because at the end of it, let's say you show metformin does in fact increase health span and lifespan, because it's an off-patent molecule, there's not a business model to monetize that. That doesn't mean that foundations, governments, others might still want to do this. There's plenty of public health benefit. And so other ways to say this is worth doing, but it's unlikely that you're going to pharma to fund that kind of study.
Yeah. And related to that, if we're talking about rapamycin, which is another small molecule, I know that some of the pharma companies, I think that it was Novartis, they created something called Rapalog, which is a rapamycin analog, because rapamycin have the same problem that is off patent. And they say, okay, let's go and change it a bit and use the Rapalog. And then if it's working, then we can sell it because it's under patent. So what I'm saying, there is always way around. I don't know metformin good enough, but I assume that you can do something similar to metformin if you really want to do it.
You can, and of course, some of the rationale for the Rapalogs is not just the patent status, which may be part of the calculus, but also looking for different pharmacokinetic profiles. Which cells does it get into? There's a couple of different downstream branches that after mTOR, rapamycin, because of the way it binds this thing called FKBP12, which then allosterically inhibits mTOR. It doesn't really matter, but because of the way it acts, it affects one downstream branch more than the other. There's also some concern that the target of interest is really mTOR complex 1. Rapamycin does not bind to mTOR complex 2 at all, but it does seem to depress it over time with long dosing. And so are there ways to get around that? And maybe you just need to pulse dose rapamycin, but maybe there are molecules that would get around that. And so that's what some of the companies in this space are exploring. It's not just about the patent status, although except that's part of the story.
No, it's a great point. And again, by my interview about GLP-1, what I learned, which was fascinating, at the beginning, the GLP-1 wasn't so active. So they had to make it more stable and make it a bit more potent. And just a few years ago, there was something called Saxenda that you need to inject every day. And now it's once a week. And we are starting to talk about maybe once a month. So basically a pill that you will take. So I think that it's at the end of the day, us as a human, we are lazy and don't tolerate pain. So we detect the Lilly and Novo Nordisk of the world to make our life easier. And because they have so much money on the line, they will do that. So I think that I agree with you. It's a very good point of what is on the line. So far, when we discussed the pharmaceutical and pharma company, what I'm hearing from you that all of them are basically focused on a very specific hallmark of aging. Are there other hallmark of aging that are maybe less exciting for pharma today, but in your opinion might be more exciting in the future? Like if you're talking now with an entrepreneur of a company that want to look at the hallmark of aging and come say, oh, let's take something that is very unique. What would you tell him?
Yeah, I mean, again, I've sort of voted with my feet on the hallmark that I think is the most interesting, which is the epigenetic alterations. Again, for the reasons I described, I think it has long-term potential truly to reset. We'll see, right? I'd say it's a guess. I don't have evidence for it yet. And in the near term, it's very, very close to clinic, right? We can see therapeutic assets that should have benefit for patients and in the 5 to 10 year time frame that you were discussing. I do think, unfortunately, we don't yet know what's upstream and what's downstream and what's compensatory among the hallmarks, right? So upstream would be cause, downstream would be an effect, and some effects are actually compensatory. They're actually trying to fix the thing that's going wrong, and you wouldn't want to get rid of them. And the hallmarks at this stage, huge kudos to the authors that created this framework, because it gives us a vocabulary to talk about it. But even they would say, we don't know what's causal. And of course, if you're trying to find the right intervention for health span and lifespan, that's the thing that matters. You don't want to go to a downstream or compensatory piece. So there's value still at the stage we are in exploring all of them until we actually can answer that question and say, no, these are the elements that are causal and these other ones are not.
Yeah. Okay, good. And a follow-up question, maybe it's not directed completely to that, is about the explosion of funds that coming to the aging research. There are plenty of billionaires that decided to inject a lot of money. Some of them are more extreme, like Brian Johnson, that doing an extreme experiment, let's say. And some are more like opening a new institute and recruiting a professor from the academia and paying them a fortune to leave their university and move there. There are, as you said, some countries like the Saudi Arabia that decided to start at a Evolution Foundation. And if I'm recall correctly, they are investing like $1 billion a year or something like that. And that ARPA-H is another example. Again, I don't know what happened with it right now because the administration is new and there are a lot of changes. But how do you explain why all of that is happening now?
Yeah. So we have a paper coming out where we're looking at how the environment is changing. And as you point out, the growth rate of investment and other activity in longevity, aging, health span, kind of a broad suite of activities, is much higher than the background rate. So I think to folks in the field, it does feel a little bit like an explosion. Yeah. You still have to keep that in context, though. The amount of activity total, even though it's growing faster than the background rate, is way below what we see in other fields. Maybe they kind of bring that to life. You can compare it to cancer, oncology, cancer's care. And I'll just work backwards. So at the end of the day, we want therapies that work for people. Typically, to get to therapies that work for people, you need pharma companies that do at least the last mile, the sort of big part of the clinical trials and then the commercialization. So they have to be interested. Typically, for them to be interested, as we talked about earlier, you need biotech companies that have created some molecules that they either do mergers to acquire or license. So you need biotechs involved. Biotechs get most of their ideas from academics, either as their founder or by reading the literature. And so you need academics working in the space. Academics tend to work where there's funding from NIH and other sources. So you need those funding sources to be involved. And of course, those funding sources are influenced by policymakers who can set the agenda for the NIH of where they're going to spend. So policymakers need to care about this. And of course, policymakers, at least at some level, are responsive to where public interest lies. And so you need public interest in the area. So if you think about that whole chain and think about where lifespan and health span research is compared to, again, cancer is just one example of a benchmark. There's a huge gap. And it's not to say that we should be doing less in cancer, because obviously that's something that we all care about. But of course, it's just one of the many age-related maladies that we suffer from. And so you could argue that aging should, get more funding because it could address not only cancer, but other diseases as well. That ratio skews something like 100 to 1 in terms of pharma involvement. It's a little bit hard to measure, but in terms of the direct operating expense that pharma puts into it, almost all have very large cancer efforts. There are only a few companies that have small age-related disease units. Novartis just restarted one. Regeneron has one. Arguably Lilly and Novo are working on it. But it's a portion of the total.
Yeah.
If you go back to biotechs, it's not as bad as 100 to 1, but it's probably something like a 40 to 1 ratio. There's about 10,000 biotech companies in cancer, believe it or not. And only something like 200 that, you could say are working on the pathways of aging. If you go back up one step beyond that and say, well, how about academic activity? Something like a 15x to 1 if you just measure the count of publications. It's kind of a gross way to measure it, but just to give a sense of the scale. If you go back upstream to funding, maybe it's sort of hard to measure what the NIH actually spends on aging. A huge chunk of their budget goes to just Alzheimer's as a single disease. Only a very small part goes to the biology of aging, but something like at least a 10 to 1 ratio. And public interest, if you go all the way upstream, unfortunately is very low. Cancer is the number 1 or number 2 health concern that most people have. Only about 50% of people are even aware that there's potential work in the biology of aging. And so there's a huge gap, right? And I mean, even aware of it, right? Whereas probably everyone, I mean, I don't think that I've seen numbers on it, but probably everyone at least knows what cancer is, right?
Yeah.
So the explosion is real. We are seeing an uptick in interest, but we have to keep it in context, which is it's still very small compared to what it could be.
Yeah, no, that's a great analysis. I really appreciate it. I haven't thought about it like that. But what you're saying is basically there is not enough interest, fund, excitement from government. So few billionaires are coming, or a few visionary countries such as Saudi Arabia coming and trying to correct it. But still the correction is so small comparing to the giant of the cancer that we still have a lot of work to do.
And I like your word, these are the visionaries, because I think these are the people, governments, institutions, individuals, that can see the future around this and realize the impact it can have on public health. And we can talk about the numbers in a minute on that, and the economy as well. I expect that will continue to accelerate as we start to bring actual medicines to market, and that becomes really apparent to everyone.
Yeah, no, that's great. So let's talk a bit about the impact. So what will be the impact? Let's assume that the investment will be higher, more academician, more biotech, more pharma. How do you vision? I see you as a visionary. How do you see the world in 10 or 20 years? What will happen?
Yeah. So I'll paint the kind of emotional picture in a second. I'm actually going to just start with a kind of hard-nosed, boring facts that, appeal to governments and economists. And this isn't my own work. It's really work that had been done by a number of great folks. There's folks named Murphy and Tobel at University of Chicago wrote a National Bureau of Economic Research article on the benefits we've already seen from extensions in healthspan and lifespan. Andrew Goldman at Rand has done great research on this. And then most recently, Andrew Scott at London Business School has done some nice work building on actually the model of Murphy and Tobel. And what all of these folks have shown is that there's actually tremendous benefit from extension of healthspan and lifespan, which is contrary, I think, to a lot of people's kind of initial assumption. Like we think, well, we're going to end up with all these old people and what a burden on society it's going to be, right? But it's actually the answer to this problem of the impending gray wave, because what happens when you extend, particularly healthspan, but also lifespan to some degree, is you actually extend the period in which people are actively contributing. So whether that's working or consuming, both of which drive the economy, it's number one. Two, you're delaying and probably shortening the period in which they need to draw down benefits, whether that's healthcare benefits or Social Security, these kinds of things. what we see is centenarians have a very short period of being sick. And obviously it's pushed down in time. So you delay it and shorten it. And then the third is there's value to life itself, right? And you might say that's infinite value. But economists put a kind of what they call the value of a statistical life, which is, well, how much is it saving, a life or saving a year of life? And you can put those in these models as well. So three sources: the benefit from increased production, the benefit from shortened and delayed drawdown of resources, and the value of life itself. And you get to astonishing figures. So something like a 10-year extension of Healthspan is worth $300 trillion just in the US.
Wow.
That number is meaningless. So maybe to put that in context, the whole GDP of the world in 1 year is 100 trillion. So it's like 3 times the GDP of the world. That's an enormous amount of money, right? At value, I should say, because it's not all going to be in cash, but a lot of it is. And if you can find ways to unleash that as a company, then you're going to accrue some of those rents to yourself. So there's tremendous, just pure economic value. But I think the way you asked the question, which is the way that resonates with me more, and I think a lot of other people, like what is this vision for this future? Imagine a world where we have, what if Einstein and Newton, didn't have to die? They had an extra 30 years of productivity. Everyone dies at some point, but extending the period in which, people who have, transformed the world would be able to act longer. Imagine you had 30 extra years to spend with your loved ones. Imagine you had, what would you do at that time? Would you learn something new that you've left off the table? I actually think it's an incredible unleashing of the human potential if we can unlock more time. And there's some important things that we need to address socially around this, like make sure we avoid inequality, make sure we avoid damage to the environment. We can talk about all these things. Individual choice is important in all of this, but those things I believe can be addressed. And there's tremendous value in this world where people are able to contribute and share time with loved ones and, change the world over a longer period of time.
Yeah. And just an anecdote, my mom is 90 and I went visiting her like a few weeks ago and she had her retirement party. So she decided to retire at the age of 90. So that's pretty similar to what you're saying, because think about it now, for women it's 65, whatever. So she retired like 25 years later. And my father retired at 87 and retired just because COVID came and he said couldn't go to work. So he said, okay, I'm retiring.
And not everyone's going to want to do that. Some people want to retire at 62 or 60.
Yeah.
Individual choice matters here. This is not about forcing people to live a certain way. But for those that want to, and that see the benefit, right? Why would you deny people that choice?
Yeah. No, absolutely. I agree with you. It's not everyone want to retire so late, but I think that it's all about how much you like your work. And I think Steve Jobs said once that look at your life as every day is your last day, and see whether you will do that if you will know that it's the last day. So if you don't like your work, don't work there and find some place that make you exciting. The same with a family and all of that. So I hear you, but that's the way that I'm looking at it. And I think that another interesting point that you raised that I haven't thought about it is, in a way, we are learning in our life. If I'm looking at my life 20 years ago, now I'm making much better decisions that I did before because I learned a lot. So if you have another 30 years to learn and to apply it again, if you want to have dementia and if your body will work, then, as you said, Einstein can be 5 times better, and Steve Jobs can be 5 times. So imagine where can we be and how it can expand the progress, because it's much harder to teach someone else than teach yourself. So I think that's at least for me, makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, and look, we have to ensure that we have social systems that create space for the next generation, that when you I don't know, how long do you want to be married to your wife, right? My wife wrote a piece that is in press right now, which I accepted, which was, if you live an extra 80 years, maybe you want to change, which is, I think we'll have to think through some of the social implications. This is a long way away though, right? Right now we're talking about Healthspan expansion of, decade or two.
Yeah.
I think, this sort of living 80 extra years, it's not impossible, I don't think. We'll see what the proof is in the empirical, can we actually do it? But I think we're a long way away from really having to kind of address the social implications of something like that.
No, I agree. And I think that if we are, I'm trying to wrap everything together of what we discussed today, which was really fascinating. So we discussed about a bit about intervention that we can do, like let's say pharmaceutical intervention. You discussed the reprogramming. That I agree with you. It's very exciting right now. Again, nobody knows to work, but if it work, it can be a real game changer. But still, we have now the lifestyle and the exercise and all of that. And I think that the example that I gave about my parents, what you discussed about the centenarian and how they live to maybe 100, maybe there was one lady that was fortunate enough to live to 122. Basically, what I'm trying to say, as of today, you have a lot of tools of changing your lifestyle, or not changing, but making it better. Exercise, environment, emotional, and all of that. And that can hopefully increase your health span, maybe not increase your lifespan, but allow you to live as long as possible, like the centenarian, and then die as a fruit fly a day, the day that you are sick, which is amazing. Then you have maybe all the pharmaceutical, or maybe as you said, the caloric restriction that maybe increase your life only by 2 years, but still 2 years is when you are I don't know, 90 and you get, you know that you can live to 92. That's amazing. I think that I'm starting to...
And don't ignore the health span effect. So, maybe the lifespan is only a couple of years, but if you can get a decade or even 2 decades of better health and productivity. And
absolutely. And when you get older, you start to feel that the most expensive resource is not money, is the time. So I think that when you're getting older and older, I think that all of us, let's say everyone that enjoy life, believe that the time is the most important resource, and you need to manage it the best that you can. Sorry.
So there's a lot of things that all of us can do right now. There was a great study conducted at the VA, the Veterans Affairs in the U.S. So somewhat of a closed system, right? Because they're able to monitor people over a long period of time. It was an observational study, so it has all the caveats that I mentioned already of, you don't truly know what's causal. But they looked at ultimately 8 different habits that were associated with longer lifespan. And, they all sort of make sense, and these are all things that we can do. So just to run down it, because no, there's not really any real surprises here, but just to be on the list. There's what I call the Holy Trinity, right? Is eating right, which means eating not too much, and largely a plant-based diet. There is exercising, and the benefits of exercise appear to accrue asymptotically. So you get a lot of benefit with just a little bit, and then you continue to get benefit even out to marathons, running marathons. But the benefit becomes less and less with each sort of additional amount of exercise. So you really have to, even if you ran a mile a day, you would get most of the benefits of exercise or some equivalent thereof, right? Whether that's weightlifting or whatever else you want to do. That's the second one. The third one is sleeping, trying to get an adequate sleep. That can be driven by stress and obviously, external circumstances. So not all of us have the luxury of being able to get enough sleep even when we want to. But if you have control over at least trying to set conditions for that. So, appropriate downtime before you go to bed, leaving adequate time to sleep, there's some tools you have around getting prepared for sleep in terms of meditation, that sort of thing. So that's the third. Then there's the 3 thou shalt nots, which again, I don't think will surprise anyone, but it's don't smoke, don't do drugs, and don't drink, or at least don't binge drink. Although the evidence increasingly is that any drinking at all is unhealthy. You can set boundaries in all these things, which are you're not maximizing just life. So it's not just years of life, but life and years. And so some folks want to have a drink now and then because it matters. It's part of their quality of life. That there's an argument for that. But at least on the lifespan data, what we see is that it adversely impacts it. And then the last 2 are around mental health. It's managing stress and ensuring appropriate social relationships so that you have some connectivity with folks around you. And these 8 things were all associated with a longer lifespan, statistically significantly so, each worth a couple of years. So that if you add it all up, it was 24 years of difference between folks that practice these habits and practice and those that did not. None of that none of that is, fancy gene therapy or even just, over the counter drugs, right? It's all just lifestyle things. Of course, then you can start to think about interventions beyond that in terms of supplements and so on, although the data around it is, very limited so far.
Yeah, no, I think that it's a great a summary, and just an anecdote about that. We at InsideTracker, we have a lot of runners. So we run a research and we actually publish it, I think last year. And we looked at tens of thousands of runners and looked at how many miles, or are they running a 5K or 10K or a marathon or ultra marathon, and looked at the effect on specific blood biomarkers. And some of them, like what you said, you have an effect between a sedentary and the runner, but it doesn't matter if you run 5K, 10K or. But some other marker, you see a dose-dependent effect. So maybe for some marker, you will need to run a marathon, for other you don't. So high level, I agree with you, but there is it's like the personalized nutrition. You said eat better, and in comparison, we can come and tell you exactly what you need. You need 1 avocado because your LDL is high and the glucose is high, and someone else need more fiber because the other thing are. So I think that I'm 1% agree with you that lifestyle can do a lot, and the 24 years that you mentioned, that's amazing. That's a lot. Think about what can you do in 24 years. It's like it's a full career or a career plus. And we have it under our control. So it's not tomorrow. It's not using the Yamanaka factor and doing reprogramming that hopefully will come in 5 to 10 years. But you can do it today. And hopefully, if you do that, you will be alive to enjoy the Yamanaka factor. And hopefully. Or if not, there will be Metformin or apomycin or a lot of new things that nobody knows about. So I think that at least I looked at it, Michael, I'm very optimistic about what's happening in the longevity domain right now, because it's, as you said, it's just the beginning, but it's an exciting beginning. And I think that there is a lot of potential there. Yeah.
And it's part of a broader trend, right? I just, where are we, right? I think we're in the golden age of understanding biology, right? It's sort of the last hard science that it's really, really hard. Like, it's unbelievably complicated how even one cell works, right? 20,000 genes, tens of thousands of proteins, snippets of RNA, small molecules, all interacting. It's really a very complicated problem to try to understand. We didn't have the tools until now to truly do that. And part of that is in silico tools, right? To be able to manage this incredible complexity in a way that maybe the human brain can't always do. Yeah. But then also, real wet lab tools that allow us to interrogate and actually get data from these systems that we didn't have before. it's an amazing time to be alive. I think just from the sort of interesting scientific discovery angle, much less what it can do for us personally, I think we're just going to see amazing things.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. And in a way, my viewpoint of the world today, we are in the AI revolution. That maybe it's getting closer to peak. Again, you have more information, so maybe I'm wrong. And then we are at, let's say, the beginning of the weight loss revolution, I call it, or the GLP revolution. And the longevity revolution is the next one, but it's really, really just beginning. It's like maybe 10 years behind the weight loss revolution and 20 or 30 years behind the AI revolution. And it's coming. That's probably the big one, in my opinion.
We haven't advanced the state of knowledge very much yet. So those 8, recommendations for living well that came out of the VA study. I was reading Francis Bacon's Novum Organum from 1567 or whatever. And actually, all 8 of the things that I mentioned, he lists. So far, we have some good ideas around things to do, but we've not yet revolutionized. I can see the path to that, right, with things like cellular reprogramming. Yeah. But as you point out, we're not there yet.
Yeah. And I usually conclude the discussion by asking a tip for Healthspan and longevity, but you already provided it. So anything else that you would like to say before we conclude the discussion?
No, just a huge thank you. I mean, this series that you've run, I mean, it's just amazing, right? And it's really, you ask such incredible questions to a range of such amazing folks. I'm really grateful that you included me among them. And, I really hope that some folks got some ideas from this that sparked them to interest in the space.
Yeah, I enjoyed it a lot. And I think that we came out on our time. Thank you so much, Michael. We look forward to exploring the research of the field of longevity each month with you and the other leading scientists. For more information, please go to www.InsideTracker.com/podcast. Again, it was an amazing discussion. I really like the high-level 30-foot discussion. I think that it's very important to know how to zoom in and zoom out, and definitely you are good in that. So thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Longevity by Design. Please subscribe to this podcast on Apple, Spotify, or YouTube. Longevity by Design is powered by InsideTracker, a personalized health optimization platform that helps people improve their lives by improving their bodies from the inside out using personalized, science-backed recommendations for nutrition, supplements, and lifestyle changes. To learn more, visit InsideTracker.com/podcast.